Morning, people. Stories like this test me. The newspaper reports, I was fed a lie. Brexit-voting retiree says she misses having fresh ricotta cheese and a €500 a month Italian cottage. Now I know that we have to show love and compassion to the people who've changed their minds because that's the only way we're ever going to move forward as a society. But for me, there's always been a line. If you voted Brexit in 2016, I get it. I could have voted Brexit in 2016 because if I didn't study EU law and I heard the news that we're sending all this money to the EU, £350 million, doesn't matter the number, but it's a lot of money either way, then I think, oh, that money could go to the NHS. I know the NHS is struggling. Maybe it does need that money. Maybe we'll be better off voting that way. And especially if I came from a part of the country that had been historically underfunded, that had seen London boom with jobs, growth, investment, infrastructure for generations, and they got nothing. Under those circumstances, I could have easily voted leave, and so I get it, and I don't hold any hatred in my heart for people who just voted leave in 2016. However, if you then watched the negotiations for 3 years, you watched the society tear itself apart, you watched the many marches and protests that took place across the country against Brexit, saying, this is going to hurt us, we are desperate, we've been through years of austerity as well, and we don't want to be made even poorer, and you still voted for Boris Johnson, watching everything that he'd said just crumble. All this talk about how it wouldn't damage the economy and the absolute chaos in Parliament and the promises to get Brexit done, even though it was clear there was going to be more negotiations afterwards. And you still voted for the Tories in 2019. That means you'd have heard the screams of your fellow citizens screaming in panic, do not hurt us. And you still did it anyway. Under those circumstances, I just can't feel any sympathy. I can't. And so every time I hear a story like this, I kind of feel like Rick in season 8. But because we don't actually know how she voted in 2019, let's look at what she actually said. I feel trapped. It's a nightmare. Why didn't our politicians tell us that everything was going to change and that our dreamlike expat life would be shattered? Motherfucker, what? This is why I'm split, because it is possible, I mean just barely possible, that the only news she was getting was from the Daily Mail, the Express, and Facebook, which just goes to show how dangerous Facebook was because it put us all in these echo chambers where we'd only hear one side of the conversation. And so maybe all she was hearing was Brexit supporting propaganda, but even still, like half the content the Daily Mail was putting out was about that's Project Fear, that's Project Fear. And so she would have heard the warnings about Brexit, at least indirectly from Remainers like David Cameron, who, by the way, was her Prime Minister. So which politicians exactly are you talking about? Because the only thing that makes sense to me right now is she's talking specifically about how her dreamlike expat life was shattered. So maybe she heard the warnings from David Cameron about how Brexit would affect the economy as a whole, but she only really cared about how it would affect her. Talking about, now I have to set calendar alerts to avoid staying in the EU longer than the 90-day limit that Brits are now restricted to since Brexit. That's the thing that's made her change her mind. Not the fact that Brexit has raised food prices by over 6% and taken £1,000 from every household in the country during the worst poverty crisis ever recorded. And the irony is, I spoke to Brexiteers before the election who were supporting Brexit because they've been led to believe by the media that Remainers only wanted to stay in the EU because of silly things like cheap holidays. Because Remainers were painted as middle-class people with middle-class concerns, and Brexiteers were the champions of the working class. And now we're getting story after story of Brexiteers finally changing their minds about Brexit. Why? Because it's finally affected their bougie lifestyles, which means they're still viewing Brexit through the same broken lens they saw it through in 2016. And of course there's an age dimension to this because she's a 68-year-old retiree who's obviously going to deal with the consequences of this for far less time than the generations who voted to remain. And the thing is, there were people who recognized that before the election, even if their initial reasons for supporting Brexit were dumb.
I voted to come out because, do you know why I voted to come out?
What?
Because I genuinely thought we'd stay here. I honestly did. Then I heard it on the BBC come out. I was staggered, flabbergasted. I would have put money on it to stay. No, I want it to be really close. So there's a lot of people not, as against Brussels. See, what I don't do is people like your generation. There's a lot of you, men as us. We're gradually going here, and I don't want your anger against us because we were the lucky generation. You're quite right, even though we're paying a bit more. We were lucky. I never had to go to war, never had to be script.
And now, yesterday's YouGov poll shows the people of the UK would vote to rejoin the EU by a ratio of 62 to 38. So who should we really be focusing our anger at? Her? No, she's not a lawyer, she's not a politician, she didn't study EU law, she's just a voter. There is absolutely no point in being angry at individual Brexit voters. Let me put it this way. If a lawyer lies to a client and that client then makes a stupid decision on the basis of those lies, let's even say that that lawyer breaks a few laws to make sure the client goes through with the decision. Does it make any sense to start shouting at the client? Because our MPs are literally our legal representatives. They make our laws. And she's saying, why didn't our legal representatives inform us properly? Now, you can call her ignorant for not listening to the right ones, but Remainers weren't all experts in EU law either. They simply listened to the voices on TV as well. So every time we see a story like this, yes, we should be angry, but let's make sure that anger is directed at the people who really deserve it. I'm Femi. Have a great week.